I have always been interested in the physical sciences, botany, biology, entomology, and my brother Bill is the Regional Fisheries Manager at the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, and today we are in Marion, Virginia at the Aquatic Wildlife Conservation Center, and we'll interview Tim Lane, the director, and his staff about the amazing work they're doing with freshwater mussels and the hellbender salamander. So don't go anywhere.
This is the eastern hellbender, and it's the largest aquatic salamander in North America. It actually lives right out here in the South Fork of the Holston River that runs through our facility, and we actually found an abandoned nest out there. From that, the juveniles hatched out and they were raised here in captivity, and some have gone to live at the Forest Service centers for outreach. But we still have one here, Cletus, and he's our little mascot, and every time we give tours to the public, he's a big hit. So they like to live under flat rocks. They actually can live upwards of 20 years, and some of them have been known to live under the same rock throughout their entire life. So
Wow.
Leaving rocks alone in the river can be important to native animals. We always encourage people that go visit streams not to disturb the rocks in the stream for that reason.
What's his name?
His name's Cletus, and he had several other siblings that were here when I started in 2016, but they've since found homes at several aquariums and the Forest Service centers nearby that when people visit, they're able to actually see one. And we feed them crayfish from the local stream, and also you can see we've got some black-nosed dace in here, and he'll actually sit up like a little puppy dog and pin him to the side of the tank and eat him. But he's really nocturnal, so most of the feeding occurs when we're not here. What we found was we had to get him tested for Kittrell, which is a known fungal infection that amphibians nationwide and worldwide are suffering from, and he actually tests positive for that, so he's better off staying in captivity as an outreach animal, and we don't want to put him out and compromise any of the native animals in the stream. The eastern hellbender salamander is a really good indicator for good water quality and overall stream health. They need clean swept sand and gravel and open cobbles to live under. They need plenty of freshwater fish and crayfish to eat. And so they're kind of like a canary in the coal mine, if you will, that when they're present, we kind of know that the stream is in good shape. And when they're gone, they're one of the first organisms to disappear and impact a stream. So the eastern hellbenders numbers have really dropped over the years because humans have mowed down a lot of the vegetation to the banks of streams, and that opens up a lot more sunlight to the streams and increases the daily temperatures that they experience. Also a lot of sedimentation from runoff in municipalities dumps right into streams now. A lot of the fine sediments from that fills in all the gaps, and you can see how he likes to burrow in underneath this flat rock here, that if a lot of sediment fines filled that in, he would have no place to burrow into. This is a full-time aquatic salamander. A lot of salamanders have different stages and actually live in under leaf packs and forests for parts of their life, but this animal actually lives in the stream full-time, so year-round water quality is really important to them, and also like low impacts, and they need really forested watersheds. We have the Forest Service owns a lot of land right above our facility, so all the forest is grown out onto the stream periphery. There's a lot of shade that just keeps that as like a perfect trout stream, if you will, or perfect for hellbenders. The hellbender is definitely one of the longest lived salamanders in North America. They can live for decades. You can see a crayfish here that we've fed him. He'll hunt them down when he's hungry.
So that crayfish doesn't know it's sitting.
He doesn't know he's food. He just thinks he's living out in the stream like with other fish and hellbender friends.
But without the crayfish, the hellbender
right.
can't live.
And see, that again is important for us to have clean stream because it's an entire interconnected web. The crayfish need clean substrates. The fish here help keep the stream clean, and so all of them being out there is actually important to the hellbender.
One of the problems with the eastern hellbenders population is that historically anglers were concerned that maybe hellbenders were eating the fish in the stream, and they would sometimes catch hellbenders, and sometimes the hellbenders would maybe be eating the fish on a stringer in the stream, and they would be killed. Sometimes people were just scared of the hellbenders because of their appearance, and they would kill the hellbenders, and that really serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever, because they are ecologically important and they're a unique species in the aquatic environment, and they're totally harmless. They do not impact the fish population. They do not impact the aquatic fauna at all. So hellbenders are just a species that needs to be celebrated in Appalachia, and I think that you know, the efforts to save it and help it to be better understood. A lot of research going on around this part of the country on hellbenders is extremely important.
These are the native freshwater mussels that are still present in the Clinch River in southwest Virginia and northeast Tennessee, and also in the Powell River, which is a tributary of the Clinch River. We produce many of these species at the Aquatic Wildlife Conservation Center here at Department of Wildlife Resources. We've produced 35 of these species here since 1998 when the facility first started, and we've released 22 of them into the wild. That includes 14 federally endangered species and 3 other state endangered species. And each one of them has their own unique challenges to produce them. They all have very different life histories, just like the native fish that they rely on out in the stream. For example, some of these animals release little packets that look like aquatic invertebrates, and their babies are in those little packets. When a fish like a darter that seeks out macroinvertebrates as a food item bites it, it pops like a water balloon in their mouth, and the little baby mussels attached to the gills. Some of the other species on here have what we call mantle lures, and they'll actually wave what looks like a small fish. It'll even have details on it like eye spots, and when a fish like a bass sees that, comes down and thinks it's prey, they bite it and they get a face full of the mussel larvae as well. So all of them are unique in their own ways like that, and we basically apply the science of figuring that out. Now we apply that here. We go out into the local streams, find the native fish that each one of them requires, and artificially put them on the fish's gills here at the facility. And then over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, those babies drop off, and then we raise them up. And that's a 1 to 2 year process, depending on the species, to get them to a size that we stock them out. And then we release about 12 to 15,000 mussels a year, and again, like that can range from 10 to 15 species per year, but in total over 20 species that we're working to restore into native streams in southwest Virginia. And so I'm going to take you through a tour through some of the facility, show you how we went about producing them, and show you actually some of the animals that are in culture here. So we're going to start in the middle building. There won't be anybody in there, to show you kind of where we start. And then we'll go through and talk to Tiffany. He's going to have some of the smaller mussels in the first building, and then Sarah's got some of the older ones out in the third building. What's your step? Freshwater mussels have a very unique life cycle. They basically all require native host fish, and so their larva actually serves as a parasite on those host fish. And without the local fish in the stream, they wouldn't be able to reproduce at all, actually. So having learned that over the last couple of decades through various universities and other facilities like here, we apply a lot of that science here at the AWCC. So for particular freshwater mussel, we'll actually go out and find a gravid female, which means she'll be brooding those Lachidia larvae in her gills out in the native stream. We'll bring her back here and hold her for a short time, and at that point we'll go out and collect per known host fish. And in here you see a lot of recirculating aquaculture systems, and you actually hold the native fish in these tanks. Here's some sculpins that are actually living in an aquarium. Each one of them is fed a continuous flow of water that's filtered both with physical filtration and chemical. We have charcoal filters to help keep the pH good and also remove particles in the water that are harmful to the fish. And also we have UV filtration on every system. All the water goes through the tank, but there is a false back that keeps the fish contained, but the microscopic juvenile mussels are able to flow out, and we catch them down at the bottom. So each morning, my staff and I are going through each one of these filters. We're washing them through a number of sieves, and then we count and measure all of the dropped off juveniles and put them into various culture systems, which you'll see in another building. So depending on the time of the year, especially in the spring, we can have as many as 500 or 600 fish actually housed in all these various tanks, and we can have upwards of 100,000 juvenile mussels coming off in just a couple of weeks' time. So it makes for a lot of busy work to do in the spring season, but right now it's August and we're kind of past that hatch-off stage, and now all the mussels that we have are in culture, slowly growing in some other systems. So here we have some endangered freshwater mussels. These are brood stock, which came from the stream, the Clinch River. This is the critically endangered rough pigtoe. It has a unique shape to it, I guess, that someone thought looked like a pig's hoof, but it also kind of has a rough outer part to it. There's a lot of different pigtoes, and these are distinguishable by the rough periostracum on the outside of the shell. We just figured out several fish hosts for this mussel. That's the first time that that's ever been done. And so we're hopeful that having now figured out the host fish, that we'll be able to apply that in the coming years and produce bigger batches of babies that we can put back out in the native stream. This is the federally endangered cracking pearly mussel. It has a really long foot and likes to live in really high flow areas. It's only known from the Clinch River in Virginia and the Elk River in Tennessee. All the other populations now have died out. We also have figured out several new fish hosts for that species and are hopeful that for the first time we're going to be able to produce them to restore them to several places that are missing throughout Southwest Virginia. But we actually got a grant to work with these particular endangered species. Not enough is known about their life history and their fish hosts. So we actually received a grant through the Fish and Wildlife Service and a permit to hold them to investigate suitable host fish to produce them in captivity. So this particular mussel is called an Appalachian monkey face. We think only thousands, if not less than that, remain in the wild at this point. Their only population is in about a 10-mile section of the Powell River, extending from southwest Virginia into northeast Tennessee. Both upstream and downstream of there, they are missing, and also in the Clinch River, where a lot of endangered species still persist. We don't really know of any of these remaining in that river anymore. So it was extremely challenging just to find the 6 individuals that we have here in captivity, but we are happy to report we were able to identify for the first time a suitable host fish, and we produced 900 babies just this year from that host fish, which is the blotched chub.
Wow.
Where they're like a little minnow.
Wow.
And then are they swimming back there for it?
They're so small.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's been really hard for us to figure out their host fish. Is they use these little cyprinid minnows and not many people even know where to find a lot of these fish. So you could see a mussel that's counting on that fish to be around. It's kind of narrowed its chances, if you will, already. And then so humans impacting the stream, potentially impacting the numbers of those fish being around, has a trickle-down effect to impacting whether that mussel is able to be around still as well. It actually uses several small fish that create chub mounds. If anybody's familiar with chub mounds, they're kind of a keystone species out in the river. They build these gravel mounds, and then a lot of other fish use those mounds to lay their eggs in and reproduce. And this mussel actually, we now know, uses that fish as a host. So they're actually found on the periphery of the stream in clean gravel. And I've even seen one that a chub picked up and put in the gravel mound with other gravels. So it's pretty interesting that they're perfectly adapted to be in those exact locations in the stream where the fish live. Just look in there and it's orange and stuff. Be very gentle. So mussels have a foot, just like a snail. They stick their foot out, but unlike a snail, they can't really graze. They use it to just burrow or sit back up into soft substrate. They really just use it to hold on out in higher flows. They don't really crawl around too often the way snails do. This is their back side sticking up where the filtration is going on. Their front is where their foot is, so they're kind of burrowed head first into the substrate.
So when they put out the lure, it's out of the back?
Yeah, and all these short-term brooders actually are the ones that release little packets that look like macroinvertebrates or piles of eggs that fish might think is a tasty food item. So once the juvenile mussels have dropped off of the host fish, and my staff and I collect them out of those sieve bags, which we showed you in the other room, we bring them in here in petri dishes and we count and measure those animals underneath these dissecting scopes. From there we partition certain numbers to different places they're housed to begin culture. So this is our nursery system. It's a pulse flow through sediment box system. Water from our ponds is actually pumped in here on the automatic timer once a day. The water is sieved down to 5 micron and fills these 2 top tanks. And then a number of pumps inside these top tanks actually send water out of these valves into each sediment tank below. Right here in the back, water actually comes into the tank, and then on the back side, water exits and flows out of the building. We also have air stones that we put in each system, and that makes sure that there's plenty of dissolved oxygen in there. And then we actually feed the juvenile mussels cultured algae. It's called shellfish diet, and we order it from California. So the mussels remain in these systems until they reach about 1 millimeter in size, and for a given species that may take 6 to 8 weeks. For others it may take 3 or 4 months. And then once they've reached that size, then they graduate outside onto the pond systems, which I'll show you in a minute. Let's show you what it looks like. So there's not a whole lot to it. We take the box. We have sediment that we pre-sieve, and also we microwave it to remove anything detrimental to the animals. We have a teaspoon or tablespoon of that sediment that we put in there. This happens every time we sample them, about once a week, to check on them and make sure there's no predator worms or anything that have made it in there that could be bad for the juveniles. We set this up with fresh dirt again. And on the back side, we've made these sieves to make sure as that pulse water flow goes through there that any juveniles don't escape. It actually fits right onto the back. So water can go through, but juveniles would get caught in there. And like this, none of this came pre-made. My staff and I designed it based on some other similar systems that other hatcheries are using around the nation, and we're kind of space limited in here, so ours is very unique in that we fit into a really small footprint. But we had upwards of 200,000 baby mussels being cultured here at one time this past spring. We expect for a lot of those, similar to gardening, a lot of those don't make it, but the more you start with, typically the more you end with if you take good care of them. Of the 200,000 mussels, give or take, that we produce, we'll end up with about 20,000 of those, or give or take, that will make it to 1 to 2 years old, and then those will get tagged and stocked to identified restoration sites all around Southwest Virginia.
My name is Tiffany Leach, and I'm a natural resource specialist here at the AWCC. Here we have golden riffle shell. These guys are about 3 months old, 4 months old. This is the first time that we've ever been able to really produce a lot of these guys off of sculpin here at the AWCC in larger numbers. And they're the reason, one of the main reasons why this facility is here. There was a chemical spill, a truck turned over in Cedar Bluff, Virginia back in 1998, and the funds for this facility came from that.
So when a chemical, it's actually a rubber accelerant, spilled during a traffic accident in Cedar Bluff, Virginia, it wiped out what we thought was the last remaining population of this species, and several hundred organisms were found, the shells were found dead afterwards, and it's actually still to this day the largest single kill of an endangered species in the history of the Endangered Species Act. Luckily there was a small population still in a creek tributary that fed into the river right there that were unaffected, but since they've basically dwindled down to none remaining, and these are actually the last hope for the species, or what we're producing here in captivity.
Is this all of them, or are there more?
Oh, there's a lot more. I think we have 800 or 900 of them. These are some of the largest though from this year.
At this age, what do they eat?
So they're already filter feeding on bacteria, algae, and detritus. You can think of them just like a natural Brita filter to the water. They're taking everything that's suspended out of the water, algae and bacteria and detritus, and they're fixing that to the substrate, what they don't consume. Everything else that they do consume, they grow off of it.
The AWCC started in 1998 at the Buller Fish Cultural Station. People who began the facility came in and renovated an old muskie production facility, which was sitting on top of some old trout raceways, concrete raceways. And the facility was not really in use. They renovated that facility, and really it was sort of like a phoenix arising out of the ashes of an old muskie production facility. And this top of the line, cutting edge facility, which is doing some of the best work in the country with mussel propagation, cultivation, and restoration, really began with some pretty humble beginnings, and it's been consolidated, upgraded, patched together, and really it may not look like much to those who see it for the first time, but there's some great things that are happening here.
So one of my primary responsibilities is to monitor our juvenile mussels. So weekly or bi-weekly, I'll go out and gently pan our juveniles out of the different systems that we're holding them in, and they'll go in these little petri dishes with water, and I'll count them and measure them and pull out any debris or anything living in there that shouldn't be there, and just get a nice welfare check on them, and then I'll take them back out to their system and start it all over again. You can tell there's some smaller ones in there that if I'm not sure how well they're doing, I'll look at them under the scope. A lot of the work is done under the microscope. Like there's some debris in there that I'll look under the scope just to get a closer look. I went to Emory and Henry College not far from here. And I'm from this area, and I interned while I was there, and so I got introduced to the world of freshwater mussels. So once I graduated, I heard of a technician opening at the facility, so I applied.
And you enjoy it? And
I do enjoy it a lot. I've been here for over 4 years. So I get to help do work that no one else has been able to do before, working with animals that a lot of people don't even know exist, that are really important to the ecosystem. And it's awesome.
My name is Sarah, and I work as a mussel biologist at the Aquatic Wildlife Conservation Center. Here I have some Tennessee bean, and these are super rare endangered species that we've been working with. And what's cool about our work is that we often work with species that are found nowhere else in the world. And so by the name here, you can see how these ones are only found in the Tennessee drainage. So that's really cool that we get to work with them here. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about my work. You know, you often hear about people working in rainforests and working with really rare species, and we get to do that every day in this little building here. So I work with them from the stage of when they drop off the fish and then growing them out. These take about 2 years to get this size, and that's when we actually tag them and release them. So we're there every step of the way growing these mussels, and then we actually go out and monitor for them and see how they're doing out in the wild. So we really get to see the different life stages of these animals. We put these mussels in different rivers around here that we work in, mostly in the upper Tennessee River Basin. So it's very rare. We've had a lot of success in the last few years growing them out, but they're really hard to find in the wilds, and there aren't as many places as they used to be. In this stock here, we were actually able to find quite a few females in this one ditch that nobody had actually looked in before, and we were actually able to find them and work with them. But some of the batches actually, you know, come from 1 or 2 females that takes hours to look for.
Were you there?
I was not there. My boss was one of the ones to help find them.
Wow.
But I've been able to go back and since find a bunch there.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
it's still happening naturally.
Yep, they're still there, and we help supplement their populations and are hoping to spread them to other areas they used to be in. What's also cool about the species is we used to think they were 2 different species by the coloring, but we've actually learned that they can actually have a wide range of shell color. And this is one of the species that we've actually gone back, we put these transmitter tags on them, and they've done really well at these different sites where we found them, and they're growing and have high survival there. They get about this big. They're one of the kind of medium-sized mussels that we work with. Mussels are really important because they help clean the water, so they're filter feeders. They also are part of the food chain, so they take nutrients and stuff from the water and actually make it more accessible to other micro and macro invertebrates on the bottom, which leads up the food chain to fish and then humans. They're also really cool that we can have these in our backyard that aren't found anywhere else. So I think it's a cool part of our heritage of this area to have such unique kind of jewels in our creek.
So in these tanks, we're actually holding log perch, a pretty rare little non-game fish that you can find in upper Tennessee River tributaries. If we wanted to find this many of them out in the stream and bring them into captivity, it would take weeks of work by a lot of people to get this number. So these were actually ordered from Conservation Fisheries in Knoxville, and they produce them much like we produce freshwater mussels. They produce non-game fish there, and so we were able to get them at about 1 inch long, and we're growing them out, and once they get a little bit larger, we'll be able to use them with a mussel called snuff box, the endangered Epioblasma triquetra, and this is their fish host, so we'll be able to produce thousands of those babies since we already have so many of their fish hosts in captivity here. A lot of work's done at Virginia Tech and also at Missouri State University. Chris Barnhart there has worked a lot with the species, and basically learning that this is their host fish has allowed other facilities like ours now to focus on getting that fish host, getting the brood stock of the female, and then we can produce lots of them because that is their primary host. And so the mussel actually will have a little display on our mantle that looks like a little caddisfly, and log perch actually feed by grazing through gravel, and the mussel looks like another gravel out in the stream with a little bug attached to it. And the fish, you'll notice if you look close, they have these longer snouts, and it's fleshy, and the mussel will actually grab onto them like a Venus flytrap catching a fly. That mussel grabs onto that snout and will hold the fish in place and gently put her larva onto the fish. And since this fish in particular has that fleshy snout, it is unharmed in that process and is let go again and drops babies all over the stream as they continue on their way. If that mussel was to catch a different fish without that fleshy snout, it could literally decapitate the fish in the process.
It's critically important to monitor and inventory the different species of mussels that are being produced. So there's a lot of time spent sitting in front of a microscope, counting and sorting and inventorying and even tagging the mussels once they get a little older before they're released.
This is actually one of the mussels that waves a minnow lure. They attract walleye, which we all love to eat. That's their host. This mussel knows that walleye feed at those times, and that's the only time it bothers wasting its energy and displaying its lure. This is the state endangered black sand shell, and they use walleye as their fish hosts. And this individual is approximately 25 years old.
Oh my goodness. How do you know?
You can actually count their age, just like growth rings in a tree. You can count how many growth rings that the individual has approximately on the outside. We have a more technical way of cross-sectioning the shell for dead animals to actually get exact ages, but for this animal, you can just basically count these rings. And you can see she's probably got 10 or 15 rings just right here. Once she reached adulthood, she doesn't grow as fast anymore. But back here, she was growing, half an inch a year. These probably live upwards of like 30 or 40 years. So the maximum lifespan of some of the freshwater mussels that we hold here is 100 years old. Literally every year some of the females are trying to catch a fish, which kind of can tell you it's not exactly a precise process. They have to try year after year after year in the hopes that they get one baby out of 1,000 to attach and for it to drop off and grow up itself into adulthood. It's just like really ancient trees in the forest that they have to keep trying year after year after year to sustain the population.
It's amazing to think that some freshwater mussels have been sitting in the Clinch and maybe the Powell rivers since before the Great Depression in this country, but with a maximum lifespan of 100 years, that's very possible. At one time they were used as a food supply by Native Americans. The mussels in the Tennessee Valley were used for button production. Buttons were stamped out and the mother of pearl that was found in the button. Certainly wildlife still uses mussels for food consumption. Probably just about any vertebrate that lives along the stream banks might use mussels as a food source. You'll find a shell mitten on the side of the shoreline or the stream banks, and that's where otters or mink have sat there, maybe raccoons, and eaten the mussel
They pound it open?
flesh. So muskrats and otters are some of the primary predators for mussels, and you can see they have a valve, just like any other bivalve. And so they would literally pull it over to the side, stick their claws in there and rip it apart and eat the flesh and then leave the shell behind. So a lot of times on a stream bank you'll find piles of shell all in one place right next to a hole in the mud, and that's basically a muskrat or an otter's burrow. And they're just every day they're bringing a few back, eating them and leaving the shells until you see a big number of shells over time. This is a flathead catfish. Some people call them mud cats. It's probably about a 3 or 4 pound individual, and he's the perfect size to produce the mussels that we're hoping to here. So we actually have a pan that I keep for tours, and I can show you all the species we've produced here for the last 3 or 4 years. In an ideal situation, we'd love to have a big, brand new state-of-the-art facility, and all of this would be inside, but this is what we have, so it's working out for now. But you can see any kind of really strong winds or raccoon that got his ideas up to get into our stuff, they could do it. Second, and I'll get them nice and cleaned up to show you. You can see all the algae that they've been sucking out of the water. They fix it all into the sand, so it takes a little second to clean them up. I'll go through and introduce your watchers to them real quick if I can. So this represents what this facility is really capable of and what we're really trying to do, and that's restore an entire fauna of mussels, not just one species. Half of these are federally endangered species, and they only exist in maybe 1 or 2 populations out of what used to be 20 populations, and so we're trying to create new populations through what we're doing here. And you can see each one of these takes expertise in a different fish host. They have different requirements for food and water chemistry and things like that. So what we're doing here is really state-of-the-art in that way, that we're producing all these simultaneously and trying to restore all of them in different capacities. This is the snuff box mussel. It's a really pretty shell. Kind of almost has little tiger stripes on it or patterns, and this is the one that I was explaining has a lure that it opens up here, and you see the little teeth, serrated teeth on the shell, and they grab that fish by the snout. So these are the ones that I was telling you use walleye, and you can see these are now about 2 or 3 years old compared to those 25-plus-year-old ones inside. How big they're still going to get. They have a long way to go.
But unlike other animals, they're still trying to reproduce their entire life.
Just like a tree with acorns every year, an oak tree, it's very similar to that. Like they have their good years where they're, they have maybe a big crop, and maybe they'll have more babies sprout out of that. Mussels are much similar to that. When the conditions are right, they're going for it, trying to capture their fish. When conditions aren't great, they might keep their energy just to stay alive for that year and wait again until next year. But a lot of them are going to get multiple chances to reproduce because they do live so long. Dams are probably one of the most detrimental things to freshwater mussels. When some of the larger ones on the Tennessee River system went in, we lost literally dozens of species in a matter of 1 year when that lake filled back up and all the habitat was destroyed. And then downstream of a lot of those dams, they're releasing water that's super cold from the bottom of those reservoirs. So even that the physical habitat is still there where they could have lived, or their fish hosts might have still lived, it's now trout tailwaters out of those dams that stays, frigid throughout the year, and so they can't complete their life cycle when it's supposed to be summertime temperatures and let them know it's time to reproduce. Now it's just winter all the time, and they're basically just going to live out their life and die. They're never going to reproduce again. The other thing is in the headwaters, we have a lot of coal and natural gas exploration. A lot of chemicals make their ways from industry. Textile plants used to release massive amounts of dye and things into these streams that freshwater mussels, filtering whatever's in the water, they were consuming those things and also, dying as a result of them being in the water. Yes, streams continue to get warmer through climate change. We can expect there to be responses by many of these animals that have not evolved in those situations. So as streams get warmer, it's going to shift those windows of when they're getting gravid and trying to attract host fish. It's also going to affect their host fish and whether or not they can persist in different streams. So us keeping the biodiversity out there at a maximum instead of a minimum will help different species to be able to adapt to those changing environmental conditions.
This is the whole community, right?
All the ones that we're mostly working with the exception of a few really rare ones that we don't have in here. So you can see what they do between 2 and 3 years of age is put on a lot of growth. These are 3 years old and these are 4-year-old animals. So this is one of our upweller systems. This technology is a lot different from the other ones that we've shown you. And so basically in the oyster industry, this is the way they grow out oysters that they're going to end up putting on your table to eat. Oysters though attach to hard surfaces, but they like upwellings that are happening in the bottom of the ocean. As currents go by, the water and nutrients are getting cycled through the sand. Well, freshwater mussels in the river, as water flows across them, it's also upwelling water through the gravel and the sand where they live. So it's actually, it looks unnatural, but this is a very natural setting for them to lay on these screens. And so water is pumped into this tank, and then the only way for the water to leave is to come up through the screen, out, and then back out to the pond again. And you can see how many mussels were able to grow in this situation, and they're right at home, happy as a clam. This is the endangered birdwing curly mussel, and they're produced from the Duck River again in Tennessee. So we're just really proud of all the work that we do here, but it is built on other people's shoulders. Folks, for the last 20 years, different staff members have really been here building this place up piece by piece. And it's also not just our own staff, but our partners at other agencies like the Nature Conservancy, Virginia Tech, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is a culmination of a lot of people's hard work and sweat out in the streams looking for these little critters, learning all about their life histories, and now finally we're at a point where we can raise them in captivity up to a point where now we can stock them and they have high survival, and you know, the sky's just the limit of where we're going to be able to go from here.
I'm really proud of the staff and what they've accomplished here at the AWCC. As a regional manager for the Department of Wildlife Resources, my job is to hire the best and brightest people around the country that I can find, bring them here and give them the resources and the support they need to accomplish the mission of restoration of these extremely rare mussels, and they're doing a great job of it.
It's raining. Thanks so much for watching this channel, liking my videos, and especially sharing them with your friends. And I look forward to seeing you when it's not raining. If you enjoyed this video, please watch these. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I'll see you in the next video.